Welcome to this webinar about the new rules regarding permanent residency, and it's an update from the previous webinar that we had. Robert Andersson from SULF is going to talk you through this presentation, and we are recording the webinar so you can watch it afterwards or tell your colleagues to watch it. If you have any questions, you feel free to ask them to write them in our Q&A, and we will try to answer them as soon as possible. So welcome, and feel free to start, Robert.
Yes, thank you, and welcome everybody again. And as Sara said, this will be about the new rules regarding permanent residency and an update from last time mainly, although there will be some repetition as well. So let's see if we can get this. So this is my name, Robert Andersson. I'm head of negotiations team at SULF, but I also work quite a lot with migration issues and other related issues. So just a few words about us. SULF, we are the professional associations for teachers, researchers, and doctoral candidates. We have now over 21,900 members, and we are not associated to any political parties. And we are one of the unions within the Swedish Confederation of Professional Associations that organize academics. And also the second largest union within SACOS, which is the organization that negotiates for collective agreements within the governmental sector. So, and a membership in SULF gives you advice and support on all types of matters related to your work, such as the pay, the salary, benefits, and social security issues. We also have an income insurance policy. I will mention that briefly in the end. You can get a lot of advice and support on all matters on labor law and access to a range of material. And we also offer insurances and loans at preferential rates for our members. And I should say you're also welcome to be a member if you do not have an employment and only have a scholarship. So the contents for today is that we will inform about the changes that affect you as doctoral candidate or researcher from countries outside EU EEA area. And we will, as we have said, we will focus on updates from the latest development and also the questions that you sent to us before this webinar. And if you did not watch the previous webinar with more information about the background to the changes and also more about the unemployment insurance, you can still watch that at this page. So, and for today, I will update you on the latest news or information we have got on the status as long-term resident, as that is an alternative route to get permanent residency that has become more important now. And also based on questions we have got before this webinar and also at other occasions, we will say a bit more about for those of you that are relatives to EU EES citizen that lives in Sweden. And also some information to British and Swiss citizens that also have some special rules to follow, and that also applies to relatives in that case. And then also I will tell you more what we have done in order to get the law changed back to as it were before. And again, we have based the information on the questions sent before the webinar in order to try to answer them as much as we can. And at this page, we have our frequently asked questions, and they are regularly updated, and they have recently been updated when it comes to status as long-term resident and for those of you that are relatives to EU EEA citizens. So you can have a look there from time to time to see what the news that come up. And that's also why we will not share the presentation from this seminar, because the rules can change, or we can get new guidelines from Migrationsverket or from the courts later on. So at this time, we would like to ask you a few questions to figure out if you have applied for permanent residency and how long you have been waiting for decision, and also if you have applied for status as long-term resident. So you're welcome to answer these questions. It's important for us to know more about this.
The answers are coming in. So we have, at the moment, there are around half of the participants who have answered.
Okay.
But they are still coming in, so
we can wait.
We'll wait a few minutes.
Yes.
I can just ask you, Robert, do you want to answer the questions at the end of the presentation, or do you want to do it during?
Yes, I think we can take it in the end. So.
Perfect. Okay, there are still some answers coming in, so we'll have it open for 15 seconds more, I think. Okay, I will end the poll now.
Yeah.
And share the result. Can you see the result now, Robert? Or
yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see about 25% of you have applied, and some of you have been waiting for quite a long time. And this is interesting because Migrationsverket still claims at their webpage that the waiting time is 1 to 2 months for permanent residency, and it seems that many of you have been waiting more than that. And I will come back to what you can do if you have been waiting for a long time. And a few of you have also applied for status as long-term resident, and we are very much interested to know how that works out, and if that is approved or not, and if not approved, why it's not approved. So we'll come back to those rules later. So thank you. Great. So again, to just remind ourselves about what is new now from July 20th this summer, and that is that you must have had a residence permit for at least 3 years as a general rule. There are a few exceptions, but this is the main rule also for relatives. And you have to be able to support yourselves through work or your own company. That's a new rule. It also applies to relatives, so they cannot get permanent residency automatically if you get it. And you must also have shown good conduct. And the rules are not specific for doctoral candidates or researchers, but they of course have a large impact, since it's hard to get such a long-term employment that is needed. And the rule started from July 20th, even if you applied before that date. What is not new then, that is that still you need to have had a residence permit for 4 years within 7 years as a doctoral candidate or researcher, or work permit would also work. if you have other types of work before or after for that matter. And during that time, it doesn't matter what type of financing you have for that stay. You must have an intention to stay in Sweden for the future to get permanent residency. You do not need knowledge in Swedish or about the society yet, but that will most likely come later. And the rules for status as long-term resident has not changed, and we can come back to that. And also the rules for citizenship are also not changed, although indirectly, of course, since you need permanent residency to apply for citizenship. The rules for EU EA citizens and their family members those rules have also not changed, and you still have right of residence or permanent right of residence instead of residence permit. So when it comes to the requirements to have your own income, this is regulated at 3 levels. First, we have the law itself that states that you must be able to support yourself economically. In the ordinance, in Swedish förordning, it said that it must be an income from work or your own company, and that it must be sustainable for some time, which in Swedish is the term is viss varaktighet. And based on that, Migrationsverket concluded that the income must be expected to last for at least 18 months from the day they take the decision, which means that it must be more counted from the day that you apply. And as we saw, the handling time can be rather long. To fulfill this requirement, of course, if you have a permanent employment, that is fine. A fixed term contract may also work, but it must last then for 18 months, as I said, at the time of the decision, which means that it must be longer in practice, as you cannot apply also for permanent residency earlier than 14 days before your permit runs out. An employment as doctoral candidate will of course count, but it's, as you know, it's hard to get such a long contract, especially in the end of the studies after 4 years. A trial employment, provanställning in Swedish, may also be approved, but in that case, Migrationsverket will make an estimation on how likely it is that it will be turned over to a permanent position after 6 months. The types of income that count is salary, of course, from the employment. It does not have to be a full-time employment as long as you earn enough. Social benefits that you get during the time you have such an employment can also count, for example, sick leave or parental leave. And the amount of money you have to earn is 5,016 crowns per month, plus the housing cost, and even more if you have to support children as well. Now, how to show that you meet this requirement? Of course, if you have a contract valid for 18 months at the time Migrationsverket takes a decision, that's one way. The fact that they determine this at the time of the decision also makes it possible to add new information to your application if you get a new contract or an extended contract before the decision is taken. If you do not have such a long contract, but you are promised an extension, you can try with a statement from the employer. And we know that Migrationsverket has said that this is something they will not take into consideration if you are expected to get an employment or not, but a promise is more than an expectation. So that's at least can be tried, and we will see from court practice how that will be handled in the end. If you have a trial employment, try to provide as much evidence you can in order to show that this employment will be converted to permanent employment. And if you run a company, you have to show that it's the income from the company is stable enough and gives an income high enough, according to what I just presented on the previous slide. So if your permanent residence permit is not granted, you can still get a time-limited residence permit, either to finish your studies or research if they are not yet completed, or if they are completed, you can get a residence permit to seek an employment or start a company, and that will last for 1 year. Here it is important to inform Migrationsverket that you want such a permit if you are not granted permanent residence permit, because otherwise they might not consider that possibility. Also here you need financing during that year, but here you can also count other types of incomes like unemployment benefits, or if you have savings at your bank account, and also other types of incomes. This residence permit to seek employment or start a company, as I said, it's valid for 1 year, no more, no less. It cannot be extended after this year, and it cannot be shorter than 1 year. During this year, you are able to take any type of work, and you can also apply for a new residence permit during this year. However, there is a limitation here that is quite important to know about, at least according to the interpretation right now from Migrationsverket. You cannot get the residence permit for research during this year unless you first leave Sweden and send an application from abroad. And this is, of course, very stupid. And we will see if that will change, but that is at least what they say right now. And this means that if you get the employment or a scholarship for that matter, where you are supposed to get the residence permit for research, you have to first leave, file a new application and come back. And we hope that this will be changed. Now we come to this question about status as long-term resident that has attracted some attention lately. And I will go through that quite in detail, quite a lot, and answer these kind of questions. If you can get permanent residency this way, the requirement here is 5 years with residence permit or a legal stay, as it's stated in the legislation, and I will inform you what that means. The type of financing you have had historically does not matter in this case. What is important, as we'll see, is the future income, and I will also inform about which type of residence permit that can qualify for receiving this status as long-term resident, and also at what time you can apply for this. So the question then, if you can get permanent residency through this status as long-term resident, and the simple answer is yes. And I know there has been a lot of questions about this, if this is really the case. But fact is that if you are granted status as long-term resident, you will automatically also get permanent residency in Sweden. And there are no further requirements that must be met in order to get that. So you are not, if you fulfill those requirements for long-term resident, as we will come to, you do not have to meet this requirement for employment for 18 months as well. So that's the point, and that is important here. And this type of this way to get permanent resident has not been much used before, because it has been much easier to get it through the normal route after 4 years already, but now it has become more important with these new rules, and you will soon understand why. So this status as long-term resident, it's regulated through a directive from European Union, but can only be given to non-EU citizens. So that's how it works. It gives you possibilities to work, study, or start your own business in most other member states within European Union. Not Denmark and Ireland are not included, but except for that, for those two, you can go to those countries. So in a way, you can say that status as long-term resident is a kind of permanent residency plus, as you get both permanent residence in Sweden, but also larger possibilities to go to other member states, most of them. So in order to get this status, you must have lived in Sweden for 5 years. So this is, of course, a disadvantage compared to the other route. But if you, for example, have been here as a doctoral candidate and you have been teaching for some time, or you have been on sickness or parental leave, you can reach 5 years. And during this time, you are not supposed to stay abroad for more than 10 months and not more than 6 consecutive months. And we have asked Migrationsverket what happens if you go abroad under, for example, an employment in Sweden and you work at a university abroad for some time, which happens, and they have promised to get back with an answer on that. So I cannot say much more about that right now. And during this time, you must have had certain types of residence permits in order to qualify. And the types of residence permit that can count for long-term resident is residence permit for doctoral studies, but not other types of studies, I should stress. Residence permits for research, for work, or also if you have been here as a relative. All types of residence permit that can give, in the end, permanent residency, those residence permit can count. Also, if you have been here on with a right of residence, or in Swedish uppehållsrätt, which we'll come to soon, that is for those of you who either if you are EU citizen, but then this is not of course relevant at all, but if you have been a relative or to our EU citizens and that relationship break up or something, or also it can be important for British citizens that lived here before Brexit. As I said, residence permit for other studies will not count, and also according to Migrationsverket information we have got from them, residence permit in order to apply for an employment will also not count. And we have asked them what that means if you have not been here for 5 years before you get such a residence permit, and then stay after that if you have to start all over with 5 new years, or if you can add time from before, and we have not got that answer yet. The income requirement that is connected to status as long-term resident is it's wider than the one to get permanent residency through the normal route, because here, apart from salary, you can also count incomes from unemployment insurance, parental leave and benefits during sickness, scholarships or stipends, and even support from other family members. In order to know the probability that you can fulfill this requirement to support yourself, here we have been informed from Migrationsverket that they make an individual assessment from case to case. They have not put up any fixed time limit like in the other situation where you apply for permanent residency only. But also they have said that the income cannot be too temporary and not come from temporary short-term contracts. But what that means, we still don't know. So that's why we are very much interested to know more about what happens with the applications in this case. And we might have to wait for new court practice here, because this has not been very much dealt with before, I would say, not at least for our members. When you can apply for this, here it has been said from Migrationsverket that you can apply already about 2 months before your residence permit runs out. So you can do this a bit earlier than an application for permanent residency. In this case also, there is a time limit on the handling time. In the ordinance, it said that a decision should be taken within 6 months. And already, if you have been waiting 4 months, you can ask Migrationsverket to take a decision on your case within 4 weeks. As always, it's important to apply before your present residence permit runs out. And if you do not already have permanent residency when you apply, an application will also be registered as an application for permanent residence permit. So you do not have to apply for that separately in this case. So next section is about the rules for EU EEA citizens, and but mainly we will focus on the relatives, because I think most of you are not from EU countries that are here today. And I will also include some information on the special rules for British citizens and Swiss citizens. The rules for relatives to EU EEA citizens and British, Swiss, Nordic citizens and their relatives. It's like this, that a relative to EU EEA citizen normally has right of residence, in Swedish called uppehållsrätt. And that is as soon as your relative has uppehållsrätt, which most EU EEA citizens will have, then you also have uppehållsrätt. What you have to do in this case, when you are not yourself EU EEA citizen, is to apply for a residence card, or uppehållskort in Swedish. You should do that within 3 months, and that is to show that you have the right to live in Sweden. You do not need any work permit if you get that, and it's also said that in the legislation that if you are a relative to EU citizen, you cannot get residence permit for studies or research, and that is because you have uppehållsrätt instead. Then I know that some of you might have got that anyway for various reasons, but this is at least how it's supposed to work if Migrationsverket knows that you are a relative to such a citizen, of course. Then after 5 years, if you have been here with right of residence for 5 years, you can apply for permanent right of residence, permanent uppehållsrätt, or sometimes it's Migrationsverket also calls it permanent uppehållskort. And in order to get permanent right of residence, you do not have to meet any other requirements than having right of residence for 5 years. And that is also both for relatives and EU EEA citizens themselves. So this is a way to get something that is comparable to permanent residence permit in this case. If you are relative to a Swedish citizen or a Nordic citizen, it's a bit different actually, because a relative to a Swedish citizen does normally not have right of residence, which might sound peculiar, but that's how it is. There is an exception, and that is if that Swedish citizen has moved to Sweden from other EU countries, then you can fall under the same regulation as for other EU citizens. And this means that in this case, you should apply for a residence permit. If you are relative to other Nordic citizen, you can choose to apply for a residence card. And because the Nordic citizen can in this case also be regarded as a EU EEA citizen, of course. although the Nordic citizens themselves do not require residence permit and also do not require right of residence. So then what about the British citizens now after Brexit? After Brexit, British citizens are regarded as any other non-EU EA citizen and will have to apply for residence permit. But for those that lived in Sweden before Brexit, there are certain rules that applies until the end of this year. And that is that you can apply for something called uppehållsstatus. And also relatives can apply for that before this year ends. And you must have lived in Sweden before 31st of December 2020 to be able to apply for uppehållsstatus. And if you already have permanent residency or Swedish citizenship, of course, you don't have to send any such application. Then we have Swiss citizens and their relatives, and Switzerland has they have an agreement with EU, so there are some special rules that apply to Swiss citizens that comes to other EU countries. One of them is that they do not need a work permit. They should apply for residence permit within 3 months, but there are certain rules. One of them is actually that you cannot get residence permit for studies or research, as it is for EU citizens also. Swiss citizens can apply without any fee. They can come to Sweden and start work or studies and apply after coming to Sweden, which you normally cannot do, as you know. And family members can also come here and start work or studies and apply from Sweden. And the fact that you cannot get residency permit for studies or research also means that you cannot get permanent residency based on doctoral studies and research for 4 years, as other non-EU citizens can. But you can still get status as long-term resident after 5 years. And there are also other special rules for Swiss citizens that I didn't mention here, but then if we come to what happens if the application is not approved, the application for permanent residency, or if you don't get any residence permit at all, then you can appeal if you don't get any residence permit. If you are granted a temporary residence permit but not a permanent residence permit, you can still appeal if the reason is that you did not fulfill the requirement for future income or good conduct. In other cases, you cannot appeal if you have been granted a temporary residence permit. And also you can always appeal decisions, negative decisions for status as long-term resident or citizenship, even if you have got other types of residence permit. If you appeal, you can stay in Sweden in most situations, and during that time you can still work, and while you are waiting for a final decision, even if you do not have a temporary residence permit. But it's not a good idea to leave Sweden during this time if you want to return again, because you can be denied to return if you do not have a residence permit. So now I will say a few words about what has happened with the efforts to get the rules changed, and it has quite a lot has happened actually, and I will just mention some things here. We in SULF, we started to debate about this both before and after the changes was implemented. We realized early that this would have quite a large, it would affect you quite a lot in a negative way, although it was for a long time quite unclear how this income requirement would really look like. We had debate articles already in the spring, and we continued with that after the changes came into effect this summer. We have initiated quite a lot of contacts and discussions with politicians from different parties. We have a cooperation with other unions and student unions and the grassroots movement that, for example, runs a very interesting Facebook group. And the latest news perhaps is that we have a new leader in our membership magazine, Universitetslärare, that is also translated to English, where we criticize the government because they said this in the end of last year. They said that it should be easier for doctoral candidates to stay in Sweden, but still they implemented these rules. But we have been doing quite a lot, and we are still continuing. We are not giving up. And of course, we have also guidance to our members about the rules that apply and how to deal with the situation as it is, until it hopefully will change. And what our aim is to get the same rules as before back, that you do not need to show any future income. I mean, we know that you will have an income. It's just a matter on how that it might not be long term enough to fulfill this requirement that we have now. This has resulted that one party, the Liberal Party, has raised a question in the parliament, and they want the parliament to tell the government to come up with a suggestion how to change these rules. And we have had positive signals from other parties as well. And we are now focusing on discussions with the two largest parties in the parliament. And we have also started to write a proposal on how you can actually change the legislation in order to achieve what we want to achieve, so that it's more clear, and we'll see what happens with that. But as you see, we are doing quite a lot, and we really hope that this will be successful, and that we can do this together, because we cannot do everything. You can do quite a lot yourselves, and other organizations, and also the universities have been active in order to get the rules changed. So we are many that work together. So then a few recommendations. Please read all our information carefully at our webpage about the situation as it is and what happens with all these initiatives to get the rules changed. You can, of course, always contact Migrationsverket to find out more about your personal situation and how the rules work, what kind of documents you have to send to them, and so on. If you intend to stay in Sweden in the future, we think it's a good idea to learn Swedish, and that is because it will probably be a new requirement for permanent residency, and probably also for status as long-term resident in the future. It is already a requirement for citizenship from 2025. And of course, it's also increases your chances to get an employment, especially outside academia, if you know Swedish. So then I will say a few words in the end about the unemployment insurance, although this is not the main topic for today, and you can we had quite a lot about that in the previous webinar. I just wanted to stress that it's still possible to get unemployment benefits despite the new rules. For example, if you have applied for residence permit, you're waiting for a decision. If you have a residence permit that allows you to work, for example, the one that allows you to seek an employment during 1 year. And also in most cases, if you have applied, got a negative decision and appeal that decision. And in order to receive unemployment benefits, you should be a member in A-kassa, and we recommend the A-kassa for academics, Akademikernas A-kassa. And there at their webpage, you can read more and apply for membership. And as a member in SULF, you also have an income insurance that can give additional compensation on top of what the A-kassa pays. It's very important to remember that you must be a member for at least 1 year before the first day of unemployment. And in order to get compensation from both A-kassa and our income insurance, you must be a member in both organizations for at least a year. And the compensation during unemployment is given for up to 300 days, working days. So it's a bit more than 1 year if you're full-time unemployed, and 450 days if you have children under 18. I should also say that our income insurance, the one that is included in the membership, covers 150 working days, but you can also add an additional insurance to cover another 150 days. So 300 days in total in that case. And that should also be done 1 year before the first day of unemployment. The membership fees is the full fee, a normal fee in SULF is 260 crowns per month. If you are a doctor candidate with employment, you pay 125 crowns per month. And if you have a stipend, you pay only 80 crowns per month. We offer possibilities for double membership. So if you're a member in other unions within SACO, other academic unions, you can add membership in SULF and pay basically one fee for 2 memberships. And remember that the unemployment fund is separate from SULF membership, so you have to apply separately for that. And at this page, you can apply for membership. And as a new member, you will also get a few insurances for free during 3 months. Insurances for accidents, for the life insurance, insurance for sickness and certain diagnoses, and also medical care insurance. And you can read more about that at our webpage. And after 3 months, you can keep the insurances and pay a reduced fee for that. So I think that was all I had, and can start to look at the questions. So I've tried to take them one and one from the top. The first question, if there is a pending application for permanent residence and one qualifies for long-term residence permit, can one apply for it before I get a decision on put is made? Yeah, I think you should contact Migrationsverket, but hopefully you can sort of upgrade your application for that and get the also that I will look at the possibility for status as long-term resident. I don't know. Now I got new questions here, but one here is that Migrationsverket froze all decisions regarding permanent residency since July, almost 3 months, and no decisions, and without public announcement or communication. And if it's any possible to hold this hold them accountable for this. one thing I should mention is that if you have been waiting for 6 months at least for permanent residency, decision for permanent residency, you can also ask them to take a decision within 4 weeks. So that's one way. Then if authorities also, they are not supposed to have too long handling times, and that they can be criticized by other authorities for that. So that's one way. But besides that, I think it's hard to, but they should speed up their process. And they claim, as I said before, that it will take only 1 to 2 months to get a decision, but it seems that is not really true. The processing time for now it's disappeared, that question, but there was a question about the processing time.
Sorry, my bad. I clicked it. What is the processing time for the long-term residence permit? I was not able to find any info on the migration website.
Actually, I don't know, but as I said, in that case, they have an obligation to take a decision within 6 months, sorry. And you should, after 4 months, you can ask them to take a decision if it has not come. So we'll have to follow that as well. Then we have a question here, if saving money can count for long-term residence. And what Migrationsverket has said there is that not the money as such, but any reliable income from such money. So the interest that you get on those kind of money or that kind of income can count, but that's perhaps not a very big help. So this makes it a bit different from for example, when you apply for this 1-year residence permit to look for a job, then it can count. But this is something we have to follow and see if cases come up and negative decisions come and you appeal. We will see what the court will say. The income requirement of long-term residency also include personal savings or not? Yes, that's what one I just answered. How to differentiate money from family members or self-saving? Well, I don't know, but what is said here is that if you are supported by a family member, that can also count to qualify for status as long-term resident, which is different from when you apply for permanent residency, when all applicants will have to have their own income. Is there any formulated plan so far on how to proceed if we get the first case of rejection, which could mean extended temporary permit? Well, if you get negative decisions, as I said, there is a possibility to appeal, and as a member, you can turn to us and get more information on how to handle that. And in specific cases, we can offer more help with that, but that's a from case to case decision. I have a question about self-employment. If you are employed, if a PhD student is 50% employed by the self-employed company, and how much should the salary be to satisfy the self-support requirement, and how it works? Well, the level is the same. As I said, it's about 5,000 plus the housing cost. The problem with when you are self-employed, I think, would rather be to show that the company is stable enough to give an income for such a long time, if it's a rather new company. So that's but of course, if you have you can have both an employment and your own company and put them together. That's also a possibility. Yeah, share the slides. This seminar has been recorded, so you can always go back and look at it, but we will not share the slides as things will change over time.
I think the person meant if we could share the slides again at the moment now, but as you
Okay.
said, Robert, we will we will publish the seminar on our website and on our Facebook page after this meeting is over, and so you will be able to have a look at the slides there.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. And then the next question: doctor contract is given annually. How to show 18 months income? Yeah, that's very true. It's very hard, even though it's possible to get a contract for 2 years, apart from the first year when you can only be for that year. But as you can only apply when you have already been here for 4 years, it's not very likely that you will get 2 years at that time. Although it may happen if you have an extension for teaching and parental leave and other reasons. But then 18 months is still not enough, because you have to have 18 months at the time of the decision from Migrationsverket. So in practice, it must be 18 months plus the handling time. That can be quite long. Could you interpret more on what does the permit for research applies to? Does it apply to academic jobs? It can. It's a specific type of residence permit given for people that work with research and that work for an organization that is approved to apply for this type of residence permit. And that is, of course, all the universities, but also quite a lot of companies can get that, or people that work there can get this type of residence permit, I should say. So it's quite wide range as soon as research is included. And according to Migrationsverket, if half time at least is research, you're supposed to have a residence permit for research and not for work. That is at least what they have said so far. We have sent a number of questions to them on this topic, but they have not been answered yet. Yeah, and there's comment here that a person has applied 4 months ago, but has not been assigned case officer, and that's of course interesting to know, but it's also rather sad, and it seems that they cannot keep those handling times that they present on their webpage. What do you mean with research? Are postdoc contracts also to consider as a research contract? Yes, I would say yes, because a postdoc normally mainly works with research and will get a residence permit for research. If I do 20% department duties, have worked 3 years as a PhD student and get 2 years contract, could I apply for permanent residency after the first 3 years? No, you cannot. You need 4 years, or you can apply, but it's likely that it will not be approved, because you need 4 years residence permit, at least at the time when they take the decision to fulfill the requirement. So that's why it's hard. When we finish our 4 years as researcher in the residence permit and are not eligible for permanent residency and get an extension instead, will that year count to apply for long-term residence? Yes, it will, as long as it's a residence permit for research or work, but not if it's to look for a job. At least not. That's what Migrationsverket claims. We will see what happens with that as well if we get appeals. Then question about research permit. If one needs to change the research permit and leave Sweden during the application time, does that create gap in residency? which will harm one if applies for long-term residency or citizenship. Yes, it probably. This happens if this happens during the time you have this 1-year permit. That time might not count anyway, but we have not been answered yet if you have to start all over again in that situation. But all stays abroad are, of course, in a way problematic as such. And even though such a application should be handled within 60 days, if I remember right, according to the ordinance, it's still quite a long time you have to be abroad and wait for a new decision. Can the permanent right of residence combine with other types of residence permit as relatives of EU citizens? For example, as doctoral student having residence permit for 4 years, but didn't get the permanent residence permit, then apply for uppehållsrätt. Yes, you can try to get uppehållsrätt if you live together with someone that has that, a relative that has that. That's an alternative. And you can also apply for long-term resident later. Or after 5 years with uppehållsrätt, you can apply for permanent uppehållsrätt as well. Did you consider family member situation in your proposal for the parliament? Not well. Now we have started to look at the rules for doctor candidates themselves, and also to the problems with this 1-year permit that you cannot get a residence permit for research. So we will continue this work. It's a bit more tricky with family members, I would say, based on how the legislation looks like. But so we'll see how far we can get with this first part right now. Does the 125 crowns membership fee for SULF cover the 300 days of added compensation, or only 150 days? It covers 150 days, the one that is included in the membership. In order to get another 150 days, you have to add an additional insurance and pay an additional fee that is based on your income. And you should do that 1 year before the first day you get unemployed to qualify. I am supposed to apply to permanent residency mid-December. Do you suggest to wait and see if there are any transition rules to be implemented before I apply for extension, or do you suggest to apply for extension already now? It's hard to say, actually, if anything will change and when it will change, but usually changes in legislation takes quite a lot of time. I should stress here also that when we are thinking about the changes, we also would like to have a change so that those of you that applied before and perhaps will have a negative decision before the law change, if it ever change, I have to stress, of course, that you will be able to apply again without leaving Sweden. That's an important part. Otherwise, there will be quite a large group that falls between the shares and will not be able to get permanent residency anyway. So yeah, it's hard to say what is best, but if you get an extension, that will of course be given from the day after the previous residence permit runs out. So that's one thing to consider. Here we have 2 questions. In case I'm a doctoral student with a few months left, but already offered a postdoc contract, and they add up to over 18 months, will that satisfy the new rule? Yes, it can, but here we have the problem that it's the situation at the time they look at your or take the decision, and you cannot apply earlier than 14 days before the permit runs out if it's an application for permanent residency. So the timing is quite important here. But the longer contract you have, the better, of course. So at least 18 months at the time of the decision. Then, of course, we will see. Negative decisions will for sure be appealed, and we will see if the court agrees in the end with Migrationsverket that 18 months is the limit or not. In the last time you mentioned that temporary residence can now be appealed when put is not given. But can one apply for another residence 1 year's permit during the appealing time? Normally, you can only apply if you don't get any residence permit at all. And the exception is that if the application for permanent residency is turned down because you did not fulfill the financial requirement or the requirement for good conduct, then you can still appeal. So that's basically the only exception there. I am a PhD student staying in Sweden with my daughter for 3.5 years. She graduated this year, but gave up on studying and started to look for a job due to a new unclear regulation, which requires sufficient means from PhD students to cover dependent, but also requires dependent older than 18 to have its own sufficient means. We need to apply for our permanent residency at the end of the year. I'm asking, did we make the right decision, or should we take the risk and start studying without working? As a non-EU, she does not have CSN. Well, it's hard to answer specifically this kind of individual situation at this with this short notice. So maybe can get back to us and discuss this later. So then there is one question I cannot really see. It's only hi there, but
if you click collapse,
okay. Okay, Stephen. So okay. Based on the previous rules, I was supposed to apply for permanent residence permit after a week from now. Considering the new regulation, do says to apply for permanent residence permit, long-term residence, or temporary residence permit. If you apply for permanent residency, you can stress also that you want them to look at any possibilities to give a temporary residence permit. And then they are supposed to do that as a second alternative. So that's one way to handle it. So then you have both possibilities there open. Yeah, it might be important to distinguish between the cases where applications have been rejected and are still pending. Yes, we will see now if new decisions come and they are rejected, how they are sort of handled and what kind of motivation is given there, and what can be done. For those that are pending, of course, we don't know much about what will happen with them. And here's in the Q&A section on your website, you say that time on different residence permit can be added if you have had a residence permit for researchers and then for as PhD for 2 years. I am still eligible for PR based on the new rules after 2 years PhD, since I will have further 2 years of unemployment, PhD employment left. Yes, you can combine residence permit for work, research, and doctoral studies in order to reach 4 years. That's true. So if you have been here working before, that can count, and it should be 4 years within 7 years time. That's the only restriction there. My husband has a permanent contract at the Swedish university, although he originally came on my doctoral visa. On March one will be 4 years, and we are both to apply for PR in late February. Will that help? Is there any impact on him being able to prove 18 months of solid income for us as a family? If he's able to apply on his own, based on his own employment, then it's of course a good chance that he will get permanent residence permit. And in that situation, a relative will at least usually get a temporary residence permit if the income is high enough. So that's one way to deal with it. Otherwise, both applicants need to fulfill the income requirement, and as a relative, if you don't apply on your own, so to say, then you can only get permanent residency if the other applicant gets it as well at first, I should say. How can one prove one is self-employed if majority of bisysslor are thrown up by university? The company should probably running before you apply. Yes, I think so, and that it must be not too sort of premature company that it's hard to say if there will be any income from this company. But that's a case-to-case judgment from Migrationsverket. Regarding parental leave, how should we prove that we have some parental leave benefits remaining and contract extend due to being on a leave? Well, if it's about getting an extension from the university, that should be, of course, recorded in the system if you have been on parental leave. So hopefully that will not be a problem to get that time back. So 1 year residence permit for seeking job does not count in long-term residency. No, that's at least what Migrationsverket claims now, and we will see if that's also one question that could end up in the court. But the reason why they say that is that this residence permit is not intended for a long-term stay in Sweden, but that of course depends on how you look upon it. If it's a residence permit in order to look for something that can give you permanent residency later. So we will see if any court has anything to say about that, if you have an appeal. If we get a job seeker residence permit after PhD, but after a few months find the work, can we change our residence permit to type of work? If yes, we can sum up the time. You can apply for, you are allowed to apply for residence permit for work during that time, but not for research, as I said before, without leaving Sweden. So it should be possible. And then if they exchange that permit during that year, or they give it from the day after it expires, is also one open question still. If you get the residency to find a job or open your company, and you find it in the meantime, to get automatically the permanent permit. And no, you have to apply again unless your application is still pending and you are able to add new information that you have got a new employment or so. But I would guess in this situation that you have already applied perhaps for permanent residence and instead get this residence permit for 1 year, but otherwise you would have to send a new application. Let's say we find a job when we are on a work seeking permit. Can we apply for permanent residence permit if more than 14 days? You should ask Migrationsverket, but I would guess no, because what they have said is that you cannot have 2 different residence permit at the same time. So also then you would probably have to wait until it's 14 days left. But please check that with Migrationsverket. What are the requirements for self-employment? Yeah, I think we have answered that before, that it must be somehow established company, I would guess, but that's something that they will have to judge from case to case. Are there any requirements for employers to support us learning Swedish? Not a specific requirement, but I think it's something that you should ask for, and we are working on that to include this kind of possibilities, at least to do this during working time, or perhaps if you're a doctoral candidate, you can do it as a course that you do for your during your time as PhD student. So that's the one possibility. Do the scholarship holders have unemployment benefit? Normally not, unless you have worked before you got the scholarship, and the scholarship time is considered as omissible time, as it's called in the unemployment insurance. In that case, it can be you can get unemployment benefits after the scholarship, but not if you have only had scholarship all the time. Regarding long-term status, do they only need the income certificate in the past 5 years, or you have to prove some income in the future? Yes, that's basically the historical income is not very important as long as you have had a residence permit. But it's the future income that matters, but we don't know for how long exactly it must last. That's still a bit open question. Can we apply for extension for study visa and later 1 year job seeker after completing? Yes, I mean, as long as you have not finished your studies and you fulfill the requirements to get an extension, you can apply for that. And the 1 year job seeker visa residence permit can only be given after the studies are completed. I'm a British citizen that lived here for just over 5 years, and you recently got the 5-year residence permit. Is this 5 year the same as long-term residency? I'm currently doing my PhD, but the employment contract has run out. What more do I need to do to get permanent residency? That's a good question. Exactly, I don't know how that looks like. Maybe you can return to us later, but it would probably be a possibility to apply for long-term residency in this situation, and that's one possibility. I hope, at least. It could be dealt that way. If my spouse has a permanent job but came to Sweden because I had a permit for doctoral studies, can we change the work permit for the spouse? Yes, I think so. You can ask Migrationsverket, because as a relative you have been for quite many years now able to take a job and work, and so that's hopefully possible. So it is impossible for researchers to stay up to 5 years because of the 2 + 2 4-year limit. So people belong to this category is not entitled to get long-term resident. Is there any plan to change the 4-year cap? Well, it depends what you mean there, but as it's possible to combine different types of residence permit for doctoral studies, research and work, and a few others, it's still possible to reach 5 years, although it's of course difficult in some cases. And so if you look at if you mean with 2 + 2 that it's after that you are at least theoretically supposed to get a permanent contract, that's true, but of course you can also change employer meanwhile. So if savings are not counted when applying for the long-term residence status, in what way is it considered to be an alternative route to permanent residency? That's because you can count unemployment benefits as income, income from relatives, stipends, and this kind of incomes that are not counted when you apply for permanent residency only. So that's why it's an alternative. What is the process or time frame from?
I will just let you know, sorry, Robert.
Yeah.
I will just let you know that the time is 1 o'clock and we still have 12 questions left. So I'm not sure what you want to do, but the seminar is coming towards an end. So if we haven't answered your questions, please feel free to contact us. All our contact details are on our website, sulf.se. But maybe you can just answer 1 or 2 questions.
Yes, the processing time for long-term residence status to citizenship. For the long-term residence, I don't know exactly how the handling time is. For citizenship, it's extremely long, unfortunately. It's the last data I got from Migrationsverket was that it was 41 months waiting time. But also there you can, after 6 months, ask them to take a decision within 4 weeks. And if you get a 1-year contract for work after doctoral studies, if you still can apply for long-term residency, even if there was a gap, it's supposed to be 5 years consecutive, but that's one question we have asked to them, if you have to start all over again in certain situations or not, and we'll see if they get back to us. If I hold a 4-year work in Sweden, another 2 year in the other EU countries, can I apply for long-term residency? No, you should have the residence permit for 5 years in each country to be able to apply for long-term residency. If you get a postdoc or research position starting right after doctoral studies, does it mean that applying for the new permit, we still need to leave Sweden? No, if you are able to apply while you still have a residence permit for either studies or research, then it's fine to apply for a residence permit for research. It's only when you have this 1-year residence permit to look for a job that this starts to be complicated. What about PhD students who are funded by external foundations like scholarships, if you are entitled to apply for permanent residence permit? No, because you should have an income from an employment, but if you apply for long-term residency, it might count as an income because there the rules are more open for other types of income. Yes, maybe we can take the other questions later because there are also other meetings coming up. Please get back to us with further questions, and we will keep you updated as much as we can on what happens. So thank you for today.
Thank you so much for attending this seminar.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.